Hi garden friends, my name is Alexa and welcome to Bloom and Wilt Gardens. I'm a gardener and homesteader in Northeast Ohio, Zone 6A, and today I just wanted to give a couple different garden updates. Especially wanted to take you through the perennial gardens and look at all of the beautiful spring flowers. I've got a lot of stuff in bloom right now. Some of it's actually starting to go on the other side and start to wilt away, so I wanted to capture those on this video today. We've had some really weird weather the last few weeks. We haven't had rain for about 3 weeks. We had a week of 85 degree temperatures, which is pretty high for late May, early June in Ohio. And we've been really kind of just going through a drought. And last year we went through a very similar situation this time of year. So I'm not entirely surprised that we're going through it again. I'm wondering if this is going to be like a trend that we have to plan for. So the other thing I do want to kind of talk through on the second half of this video is how to prepare for drought seasons, how to prepare for times when you're not going to be getting a lot of rainfall, and to keep your garden alive and thriving, or at least surviving. I know my garden, there's a lot of my vegetable plants aren't exactly growing at a great speed, but they're not dying. They're just surviving at this point, which is fine. And next week we look like we finally have rain in the forecast, and I expect a huge grow up in all of my plants. But for now, let's go take a look at all the beautiful flowers before they go away. So this is the perennial flower garden right at the back of my house. My mom and I completely redesigned this whole space last year. All of this where there's grass used to be all perennial flowers, but we took those out and relocated most of them over to my garden, in front of my garden. But what we did leave behind here, I really love all of the colors that are right through this angle. We have yellows and purples, pink, orange, different shades of blue with the iris. I'm really pleased on how this whole section turned out. And I'm getting my first red hot pokers. I was able to get some starts of those last year through a plant swap, and I'm very excited because I never see those anywhere for sale. Kitty enjoys this garden area a lot too. These are my yellow flag irises. So they're more of a smaller, dainty kind of iris. Purple alliums. This is the first year I've grown these. I put the bulbs in the ground in early March, and I wasn't sure if that was enough time for them to cold stratify, but it was, and the 2 sections that I put in did excellent. So I'm planning on doing some more this fall because I really love the way these alliums look. In the fall of 2021, I planted 15 different varieties of iris from Schneider's Iris Gardens. I mail ordered the rhizomes, and I don't have all of the different varieties memorized, but I do have a video where I planted all of them, and we talk about the varieties in that video. So I'll link that below if you're interested in knowing what these beautiful iris varieties are. Knockout roses, some lupin here, and this is starting to wilt away and turn to seed now. I have this sweet little foxglove plant. Last year it was a very large plant. It was very tall. It was taller than me. I'm 5'10", and the plant was like my height. This year it's just this tiny little thing. I don't really know why it didn't grow very big this year, but I'm still pleased to see that the foxglove is blooming and it reseeded. This is my peony plant. Now it doesn't look very nice because I've been cutting off the blooms and drying the petals to make tea out of them. And you'll see I have a short video on how to harvest and dry your peony flowers. So if you have them and they're starting to fade away now, this is an excellent time to be harvesting your peonies and saving those. These are my evening primrose. Very beautiful. Another iris variety. This is a purple flag iris. Now my clematis has done actually very well this year. Usually this plant doesn't flower very much, but this year it's doing very well. So I'm pleased to see this clematis blooming. And then my favorite, my climbing rose. I have this peach pink color climbing rose that just started to bloom this week. This plant I think is now 3 years old here, and it is just delightful. It smells so good. And I do save and harvest the rose petals from these as well. So once they start to drop, then I collect the petals from the spent blooms. And I save those for teas as well. And so that is one of our perennial garden spaces. Looking very lovely, and I have been having to water this area like every other day. I have a sprinkler I turn on. All this grass here was starting to turn very brown, so I had to start watering it more. One day this week I accidentally left my sprinkler on for 2 hours, so it got a very nice heavy water. I'm just not looking forward to what my water bill is going to be. Alright, and then here are where we put the rest of the perennials that we transplanted last fall, and they're all in this garden bed right in front of my vegetable garden. So not as much in bloom over here yet. I did have my purple iris here, but those are now spent, and azaleas, which those are spent as well. So what's coming up next are some Asian lilies, a lot of different kinds of lilies, liatris, but here is another one of those peony. Now in the fall, how we move this is we just took our shovel from the main plant and chopped right down and grabbed a nice section of the root ball and transplanted it in the fall. And here's another one of my pokers. It's going to be epic. I'm so excited to see this in full bloom. Like, it is just, I mean, even right now, it's just about to like pop. It is amazing. I love that. And then we have some salvia. It's very delicate, reminds me of lavender. And then on this side is pretty much a mirror image of the other side. So our poker, iris, and it looks like we have some yarrow plant starting to bud. And this should be a yellow yarrow. And this pink azalea is just about done as well. But we can appreciate a little bit of color here. And I have one more perennial garden area to share. We have a lot of perennial gardens over here. I do thank my mother because she helps me maintain all of the perennial gardens because it is way too much for me to do on my own. Okay, so by the side of the house, a lot more really beautiful things going on here. I cannot wait for these Asian lilies. There's like really tall Asian lilies. I love when these bloom. So another one of my exotic iris. This one is stunning. This beauty just bloomed a few days ago. And they don't last very long, especially with the lack of rain we've had, but the colors on this are beautiful. I posted a photo of this on my Instagram and someone said it's like Rapunzel's dress from the Rapunzel animation, and I have to agree. I would love to have like a dress or a skirt with these colors. That would be beautiful. But yeah, that one just kind of fell over. And then this one here is a black iris. Now, I mean, it is just a very, very dark purple, but it was advertised as black, and the buds, I mean, the buds definitely look black, but this one just bloomed. So happy to see it. This plant did not even bloom last year, so I'm very excited about this one. Iris plants down here that they didn't bloom last year or this year, so I don't even remember what these are. I gotta go and check my video to see what these are and figure out why they're not blooming. All right, I actually have two different ones here. Now this one is starting to also wilt, but this iris is called News Flash, and I'll put a photo on so you can see when it looks nice, but look at the petals on this. It's just so unique. This one is one of my favorites. I mean, I don't know, they're just probably all my favorites, if I'm honest. And then this one here is another really interesting, beautiful one. We have this nice magenta colored iris. And I had a couple other ones that already bloomed, some like really early bloomers. Those have been gone for some time. So it's interesting that all these iris, they bloom at different times. And then a very large lupin plant here. Now from this angle, that's that black iris. From farther away, it definitely does look black. Almost forgot about the snowball bush. So my kids, every year they look forward to this plant because once they start to dry up like this, then I give them permission to pick the flowers off and then we throw them at each other and have a snowball fight. So this is our summer snowball fight. So it looks like next week or in the next couple days, I will allow them to start playing with the snowballs. They always have a really good time doing that. And then up by the front yard by my telephone pole, I have another variety of iris. I don't know what this one's called. This is the last one that's still looking good, but I really enjoy the way this one looks too with the stripes. So iris is everywhere. When I was pregnant with my first son, one of the names that I really liked was Iris. This was before I knew I was having a boy. And I still have always liked that name, so I don't know. If I ever had another kid and it was a girl, I might name her Iris. Feels like it would be appropriate with all the irises I have. Oh, and another update, I finally got this area filled in. We just put in gravel to raise up this walkway. My chickens were constantly going underneath, so now they can't do that, and it looks a whole lot better. So I'm glad we were able to document all of the flowers because they are not going to last very long, but we're going to have another wave of summer flowers coming in. And you know, when you're planting a perennial garden, a flower garden, you have to think about all the seasons, and if you want to have continuous color, how do you incorporate those different kinds of plants when they bloom? You have to know when are certain plants supposed to bloom, and then you can kind of plan out your garden according to that, so that way you kind of have continuous color all throughout your garden all year round. So those are the spring plants. Our next wave of summer plants are coming, and then I need to get more plants for the fall, like mums and stuff like that. So that's kind of on my mind to think about getting more of those kinds of plants for the fall, so I have a nice display of fall color as well. All right, so now I'm gonna shift gears a little bit and talk about how to sustain your garden during times of drought. And my experience is going to apply to my knowledge of growing gardens in Northeast Ohio, so the northern part of the United States. I've never lived in a desert-like climate, so I can't speak to those situations. And I've never lived in the South, so I know it gets very, very, very hot and humid in those areas. So my experience and what I'm going to tell you is just for more of like the northern gardening. We get a lot of snow in the winter time, although this last year we didn't get as much as we normally should. But we also get a lot of rain in the spring. We get a lot of big thunderstorms in the summertime, although we haven't had any yet. And then we get a lot of rain in the fall. So we have a lot of water happening pretty much year round But when we go for long periods without any water or rain, it is very unusual. I mean, typically we would see rain at least like once a week, even a small shower. But for us to go weeks and weeks and weeks at a time with no rain, and then to be like in the 80 to 90 degree temperature range is also pretty unusual. I mean, we shouldn't really be seeing that kind of temperature until like the height of summer, late July and through August. So us getting those temperatures so early in the season as well, before we've gotten those heavy, massive like thunderstorms, is kind of strange. But because we went through this drought in my area, at least last year at the same time, I was already thinking ahead and wanting and making sure that I'm going to be heavily mulching all of my garden beds to ensure that we can conserve as much water and prevent the soil from drying out. So in all of my garden beds, I have grass clippings. So whenever I've been cutting the grass this year, I'm going out with my rake about 2 days later, and I'm raking up the grass by hand, putting it in my wheelbarrow, and then laying it in my garden bed. So I've done that, and then I also have been using hay to mulch my garden beds. And there is a risk with using hay and grass clippings that there's going to be different seeds inside of that, so may have to deal with some weeds and stuff. But at this point, I would rather deal with pulling weeds than all my soil drying out and my plants dying. So mulch is going to be a key factor. Now you can also use like leaves. So if you live in the north like I do, there's a lot of trees all around me. All of these trees drop all of their leaves every fall, and there's a lot of leaves. So if you have access to fallen leaves in the fall, you can put those somewhere, let them kind of rot in a pile, and those are really good to use as garden mulch. I have also used wood chips in the past as my vegetable garden mulch, and to be honest, I didn't care for that experience. When I used the wood chips, and they were all natural wood chips, the plants just stunted. The roots were in the soil, but the mulch on top, it just sucked up all the nitrogen around those plants, and they didn't do well. So I have now since strayed away from using wood chip mulch in my garden beds, although I do still use it in my pathways, and I will use a wood chip mulch in my perennial flowers. They seem to do fine with that, but the vegetables, I won't do that anymore. And then watering. So to help really soak in my plants and allow them to collect the most water, I try to water at the base where the base of the soil line is, as much as possible versus overhead watering, especially for my tomatoes and my peppers, where those are going to be big consumers of a lot of water, because that's just the type of plant they are. They need a lot of water to produce their fruit. So I have soaker hoses laid out in these 2 rows here where my tomatoes are. So these are 2 40-foot rows of tomatoes. So I have 80 feet of tomatoes, 80 feet of a soaker hose going the whole way. And then where I have my peppers in these brick beds over here, I have soaker hoses laid out on top of them as well. And also down here in this soaker hose where I have all of my greens. And this has been keeping all of these alive very well, and from bolting. I expected a lot of my greens to bolt by now, and they haven't yet. I do have some mustard greens that have, and my spinach has bolted, but mostly it's been good. And then kind of going back to weeds, so I have lots of different weeds all growing in here. I haven't been pulling them out, but intentionally I haven't been pulling them out because those are helping to hold in water as well. The more space that is covered in greenery and root system below, it's actually going to act more like a sponge to keep the water in the ground. So while I don't love having a lot of weeds, it does act as competition for the nutrients. I'm caring more at this point about water conservation. And then after it does rain, I will pull those weeds, but then I just lay them back on top. I don't put them in a pile. They haven't flowered or set seed, so if I just lay them on top, they'll dry out and act as further cover. I'll try to get down here. I will pull this one just to show you an example. So we haven't had rain, and I actually haven't watered this garden for I think 2 or 3 days. but this soil is moist right at the top. And you can see how dark it is. It's not dried out, it's a nice rich color. So this soil is nice and cool and moist. And this is just grass clippings that have dried out that were over top of it. So I put on a nice thick layer of grass clippings, and this is keeping it nice and moist. You can also see this soaker hose that I've got routed all the way, and it kind of snakes over into that bed there and into the bed next to it. So I kind of have a system of how my soaker hoses are laid out. Now additionally, you could install a water drip line system. That takes, I think, a little bit more time and attention to architect how that is all going to play out in your garden. There's a lot of pieces and connectors and things to make that all work. Maybe in the future I might get to doing that, but it's just a little bit more than I have wanted to deal with personally. I don't really want to install drip irrigation myself. It's just not something that I really care to do. So for me, as getting some good quality soaker hoses have been the way. The ones that I have on my tomato rows have been my favorite. I'll link those ones below. The more rubber-like soaker hoses, I don't care for those. Those have broken for me. I invested a good amount of money on some rubber soaker hoses last year, and they all split when I pulled them out of storage this year. A lot of them were broken in half, and I'm like, great. So I have more of like a cloth vinyl type that has worked really well and held up, and I'll show you those. So this is the soaker hose that I prefer to use. It's nice and flexible when it's turned off, and then when it's turned on it fills up, and then the water just, you know, kind of smooshes out of it. And it is a black hose. It did bleach out from the sun. You can kind of see the color discoloration there, but that's fine, it still works. So I just add my main line to here and turn it on. And you can't really see it here, but it's underneath this hay, and it runs at the base of every single tomato plant the whole way down. Push this away so you can see it. And so what this does is, instead of watering the tomato plant from over top with a hose or like a sprinkler, it's dripping deeply into the soil right here at the base and going down into the root system. Now the soil on top of here is a little bit more dry. If I go down a few inches, about 1 inch and 2 inches, it's nice and dark and pretty moist. It's probably due for another water. Like I said, it's been about 2 or 3 days, so it is probably time to turn the hose on and let this soak. So my tomato plants have been in here for probably 3 weeks now, maybe even 4 weeks, and they really have not grown as much as I would have expected them to grow in that time. But again, it's been so hot, we haven't had any rain, so they are just holding on. They're not dying, they're not drying out, they're just kind of sustaining at this point, which, you know, is all I can ask for. I put a lot of time and effort into growing my seedlings, so I know that we're gonna have rain. We always get really good thunderstorms through the summer, so I just have to be patient and care for them until that time comes. You may also notice that I have this black landscape fabric that's running all the way down my pathway. So another thing on, you know, keeping your soil dry is also your pathways, because even if those dry out too, water that runs down from your garden beds, so you think I'm watering my tomato plants here, and a lot of that water is also running down because these are kind of raised mounds, so the water is going to run down to the pathway, and I don't want that to evaporate. I want that to stay in the ground. All the water that we keep in the ground away from the heat of the sun is just going to help the plants grow, because those roots, you know, those roots are going underneath my pathways too, just very deep. So it's also important to make sure your pathways are covered with some kind of mulch, hay, cardboard, landscape fabric, trying to keep all the areas of your garden covered, including the pathways. And a lot of my pathways in my garden are covered in grass. And so a grassy pathway, something to think about on that. If you're in a time of drought, try not to cut your grass. Your grass also needs water to grow. And if you're in a drought and you cut all your grass down because the weeds and other stuff have gotten long and doesn't look very good, it's going to cause your grass to just dry out and brown a lot quicker. In some cases, you're not gonna avoid it, but I have chosen not to mow in my garden for the last few weeks. Either it's got a lot of weeds and dandelions and other kinds of crazy stuff going everywhere. It's not very neat and kept right now. But again, no rain. I'm trying to conserve water as much as possible and keep all the plant life that is here happy, not stressed out, not gonna cut it. Once we get our rain next week, then I'll cut it. And then so here in my asparagus bed, I have more of a green mulch situation happening. So you can have a living mulch, like a ground cover. And in with my asparagus, I have wild strawberry plants. So these make the tiny little wild strawberries. I picked some of those plants out from my backwoods a few years ago, and I planted it in this bed with the asparagus. They're good companions, but that acts as a nice ground cover, keeps the soil moist. And then there's a lot of other different plants that are growing in here that I typically would consider a weed in any of my other garden beds. Like, I don't really like to have dandelions in my garden beds and whatever this clover is, but it's actually good for the soil. You know, preference. I don't like how this doesn't look very nice in a garden bed, that I'm trying to maintain a certain appearance. But in with my asparagus, I'm okay with it. And I've got some like dock and other things that just kind of made its way. I have lots of dill that grows up in here on its own. So I just kind of leave this asparagus bed pretty wild-like, but everything thrives very well. And this is my green living mulch bed. So as you can see with all the different beds I have, everything is still growing very nicely. I know that there are nice deep root systems for all of these plants because the roots are going deep to collect the water from way below. So I know it's probably easy to think that it's good to water your plants every single day. And when you first transplant or set seeds, you just have seeds in the ground, it may be good to water more often as those plants are getting established. But what happens when you water every single day is you're kind of babying your plant, and the water is staying at the more of the surface level and not going very deep. So those roots are staying more at the surface level and not being forced to go deep to search for water. So if you wait a few days in between your watering, if you can, you're kind of forcing those root systems to keep going deeper and deeper into the ground because they're trying to find water. And so that's kind of my practice, is I don't water every day. I try to water like every 2 to 3 days. Even in the middle of this drought we were having, I was not watering all of my garden beds every day. I would kind of alternate. So one day I would focus on tomatoes. The next day I would focus on my different brassica beds. And I do use an overhead sprinkler too. I only have the soaker hoses for my tomatoes and peppers. So all these other garden bed sections that I have is with an overhead sprinkler, or I just hold the hose and let that go. Now you could also collect water through rain barrel methods. I have not done that, but that's a good way to conserve on water, especially if you have a well. I know that a lot of people are not able to water their gardens a lot during these drought times, because if you have a well, you can't focus on watering your garden. You have to like maintain your well water for your family and for your just everyday needs. So rain barrels and different rain entrapment systems are good to get into as well. So I hope this was able to give you some ideas on how to keep your gardens going when it's really hot and really dry. If you live in a different climate than I do, a more desert-like or southern climate, love to hear your advice in the comment section. I'm sure that a lot of people would find that useful who watch this channel, on how you guys support drought times as well. And at the end of the day, we always can just do the best that we can. So if watering daily or every other day is even not going to be an option for you, and you've mulched and you've done everything you can and your plants are dying, I mean, luckily we still do have stores where we can go buy our food. We can always start new plants at this point. It is not too late to start plants, even from seed. You could start plants even now. You know, or if you have friends with like tomato plants, you can clip the suckers of those plants and root them. There's so many options to start your garden over if everything were to die. And know that this isn't forever. The drought will not last forever. Rain will come eventually. So you just kind of have to keep that positive attitude. Even though I know how stressful it is, and you get a lot of anxiety, and you just really don't want your hard work to go to waste and die. But sometimes that also happens as gardeners. So, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. It was my honor to get to share some of my gardens with you today and some advice on how to keep your garden going during times of drought. And I do hope you have a wonderful day. If you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate if you liked it and left a comment below letting me know your thoughts or any other tips you have on how to keep your garden going during times of hot weather. And please share this with a friend to help my channel grow and reach more subscribers. If you want to connect with me on social media, I am on Facebook, Instagram at Bloom and Wilt Gardens, and you can find me on TikTok at Lex in the Garden. I do a lot of short form videos on all of those platforms and post very regularly on my short form videos with lots of garden tips, quick tips, short tips that's going to help you grow a successful, beautiful garden this year and many years to come. So I wish you all the best. Take care and do something you love. Bye.